What if I told you that Tony Iommi's early monstrous tone wasn't down to attitude and amplifiers? It was in fact down to the humble treble booster wired for mayhem. Today we're chasing the tone at the source and building that treble booster, only this time I'm going to be using an NKT275 to see if I can really nail that sound. I'll be adding in a switch so then you can go between the Germanium transistor and the silicon transistor seamlessly, and we can see which one better suits the thunderous rock that Tony Iommi is known for. I've spent the best part of 17 years building and modifying guitar effects pedals, both in workshops and on board warships, as a chief engineer in the Royal Navy. From schematics to signal chains, I've obsessed over the minutiae of building guitar effects pedals for the whole of this time. So if you want to understand how to make the Tony Iommi pedal tick, then you've come to the right place. Here we have it, all the parts I'm going to be using for today's video. We've got our enclosure. It's not very heavy metal. It is a fabric covered sloped enclosure. I think it's going to look good. I like these finishes. I'm a fan of this sort of floral fabric. We've got our tag board. If you're going to build this, you're going to need a tag board with 5 tags each side. We could possibly cut it down to 4, but I'll show you that later on. If you're as obsessed as I am about building guitar effects pedals and using vintage components, laying them out on tag board, then please like and subscribe. It really helps the show. It helps YouTube know that I bring value to you, and it'll spread my channel further, which means that we can spread the love to everyone. Thank you. And then we've got all of our components. So, special mentions. First of all, I've got to mention NKT275. Now, I reclaimed this from an old radio, a Pi radio, so I know that it's real. There's lots of fakes out on the internet, especially some on eBay that cost £100 each. Hint, hint, they're not real. All the odd shaped ones that aren't in this sort of metal can, they're also not real. But I pulled this from a 60s radio, so I know it is real. And then we've also got a 60s Texas Instruments silicon transistor. So we're going to go Germanium Silicon switchable. We've got some of our rather nice caps, and of course some of the last of my 2000 volt Sprague caps. Sprague. I'm never going to get that right. My co-host John always tells me the right way to say it, and I always forget. So Sprague or Sprague, what are we going with? Anyway, this is one of the last of the 2000 volt caps I've got. I really do like these, and my supplier has run out. I think this is my 68k resistor, which is our first component. If I just flick my fluke to ohms, and I'm getting no reading whatsoever, fantastic. That's never a good sign, is it? 67.5k, that is good enough for government work. So there's our first component. Now if we check our drawing, and before we look at the drawing, I've got to say apologies. This is going to be a Joe Age 5. I drew this myself with my S Pen. Apologies. I don't normally work from a drawing. I am just using it for the sake of you guys. And if anyone does want a copy of this drawing, please just write in the comments and we'll sort out me sending you a copy of it. I don't have a schematic for this before everyone asks me again. My Kossoff Drive video, I got absolutely bombarded with questions about schematics and where they can get one and stuff. I built these things from my head. Basically, I don't use a schematic ever, so I haven't got one. But I will send you this drawing. And if we take a look at our drawing, we can see that on the left hand side here, we've got our 68k resistor, and that goes from the bottom tag, the first tag on the bottom row, to the second tag on the top row. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in now. There's our first resistor in place. I haven't soldered the top row second tag, mainly because I've got 2 other components that are going to go in there. Now the keen-eyed among you will have noticed that on our drawing there's actually a 33 microfarad cap that goes into this bottom left tag. We're going to add that on the outside, and I'll show you where that's going to go when we get a bit further along. Now, as you may have noticed from the drawing, this isn't a normal Rangemaster. This is kind of the Hello Sailor Effects Rangemaster. So it's like the standard Rangemaster but tweaked. I do use a PNP transistor. However, I don't use any reverse polarity, any of that malarkey. You can just use a regular 9 volt center negative power supply. I won't pretend that I invented any of this. It is all widely available online. I just kind of made it tag board and then refined the values over time. So anyway, The 68k resistor that we just added, you could, if you wanted to, add a 100k trim pot and bias our transistor from this point, but I don't do that, so I'm not going to show you that. Now next is a bit that does matter for the Tony Iommi tone. On a regular Rangemaster, you would have a 5 NF, 5 nanofarad input cap. However, Tony Iommi's tone is a little bit darker, quite a bit darker I would think. So I'm going to start off with a 10 nanofarad cap, with the view of thinking that I may have to go up by another 10 to hit his thick, dark, aggressive tone. Now, just for this first bit, I'm going to add this in. You could add all these onto a switch, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to add in this 10 NF cap going from the second tag along on the bottom row to the second tag along on the top row. I won't be able to solder the top row tag, mainly because we've got another resistor going in there, so it's really not worth soldering that in just yet. I absolutely chose this this black cap just because we're doing the whole Tony Iommi heavy metal thing, and I wanted to go with black just because I feel like it suits the Black Sabbath sort of a Black Sabbath thing. So if we solder that bottom one in, good. I mean, we can tidy all this up afterwards once we get to it. Now the next resistor along, if we look at our drawing, you'll see is a 470k resistor. Now this one, normally I say close enough for government work when we're doing resistors and stuff. For this one, you really do want to get as close to 470k as you can. It just works better. It's easier to bias with this. This is what connects the transistor to ground, or it's its ground reference. So if we have a look here, we've got, I don't know if my leads are on the blink here. I'm getting 0 resistance. That's fantastic. So 473, 472. Now that is close enough for government work, just about. I wouldn't go much further out than that on this one. Well, not the way that I biased them anyway. And this is going to go from that same second pin in the top row, which is an absolute nightmare to squeeze more things into. From that, and it's going to go to the third one along on the bottom row. Now, if you're like me and you've decided to use really thick leg components because you're trying to be fancy and use the largest resistor that you can, you're going to run into the same problem as me, trying to squeeze them all through the tag. It's a labour of love, what can I say? It would be much easier, before someone says it in the comments, to use really small resistors, like, I don't know, half watt or quarter watt resistors, and I'd be able to fit them on here nice and easy. And then you could go one step further and say, well, you could use a Vero board, that might be easier. Or you could then use a PCB, or then you could make them SMD, blah, 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 blah. And then you could probably make something that isn't a Hello Sailor effects pedal. So I'm going to use the biggest possible resistors and caps that I can. Right, now that we have all 3 components into this second tag along, we can actually solder that in. So I'm going to go ahead and just solder this in. Outside of the Kossoff drive, this is my most refined pedal, as in the fact that I've built the most of these. I would say it's probably neck and neck between this and the Kossoff drive. I have shown how to build a standard Rangemaster before on video, which I'm sure people will find interesting if you want to build just a regular Rangemaster without all the Hello Sailor effects trickery. Fine, but this is just a little bit different. You get to use a PNP Germanium transistor with it, or silicon, as the case may be. Right, now we're going to go on to the electrolytic caps. So normally in a Rangemaster we'd be using a 47 microfarad cap. So 47 UF, for those of you who don't hate me saying UF instead of microfarad. I promise I'm not doing this just to annoy everyone who's a proper engineer. But normally you would use 47 microfarad. And I think of this kind of like how I think of amplifier filtering. So if you take a regular Fender amp, you're round about going to get 22 microfarads for your preamp stages, and maybe 30 or 47 microfarads, probably 30 microfarads for your power stages. And all it does is, if you bump the value up in your Fender amp, the same way that Dumble would do it, and the same way that Ken Fisher from Trainwreck Amps did it, if you bump the value up, it makes the amp feel stiffer. It makes it less forgiving and more immediate. So the same thing applies with Rangemasters. Now I know that Cesar Diaz in the Texas Squareface.
Clearly Joe means the Texas Ranger, not the Squareface.
Looking at one of my personal all-time favourite guitar pedals, which is the Texas Ranger by the legendary Cesar Diaz.
He dropped his values down to 32 microfarads. Why? I'm guessing it's because it makes it a little bit looser, a little bit more give under the fingers, as opposed to being quite as stabby and clinical. Now this is all subjective. I may be feeling that this is more forgiving under the fingers because I know that I've changed the value of caps in it. So who knows? If anyone's ever tried to mod a Rangemaster and put lower value electrolytics in, please let me know, and let me know what you found in your tests. But for me, the lower value will make the low end just a little bit looser. I wanted to give that loose feel because Tony Iommi had the end of his fingers taken off in a machinery accident, and that's why he used thicker strings tuned down. That's where the whole tone come from. But I'm guessing that the looser feeling will probably fit in with that style, which is why I'm using 32 microfarads for both of the electrolytics in this circuit. So this one here, clearly I've done the same thing that I always do, and I'm using a massive electrolytic that will not fit in the tag board. Brilliant. And this is going to go from tag 3 on the top to tag 4 on the bottom. So all I'm going to do is, after I've cleaned the legs, of course, because this is an old one, I'm going to bend them over like so, and then of course regular viewers will know exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to bend them back on themselves like so, and then that way I'm going to be able to get it in the space of the tags, because, well, I'll show you now. So we're making that kind of shape, and the reason being is that when we slide it through our tags, they'll actually fit through. Now you've got to remember the positive side needs to be pointing towards you, towards this bottom row. So I'm going to slide the top in first, and then the bottom. But what I like to do is I slide it right the way to the end as far as it'll go, give it a snip, and then slide it through the tag at the bottom, and that way you can get it through both of them tags. Now I can't solder this bottom tag, I can only solder the top tag, because there's another component or a cut off, a leg going through this tag here. So don't solder this one just yet. Another thing to watch for is, how do you know which end of this is positive? Well, the end with the dimple is positive on these axial caps, and if it's, usually you'll have a band around it with an arrow pointing to the negative. Or if you've got a regular PCB mount cap, you'll have the band will be on the side of the negative side. Also, the negative leg should be shorter than a positive leg. I'm going to now solder this top ending, and I've just noticed that I haven't soldered the bottom of the 470K in, so I'm going to do that now. Otherwise, we all know that I'll get to the very end of this pedal build, test it, and it'll be intermittent and I won't be able to find out why. And then when I come to look at it, I'll notice that I haven't soldered one of the connections. Actually, I was watching an Uncle Doug episode the other day, and he had an amplifier in that hadn't been soldered by Fender from the factory. So one of the wires going to the tube socket hadn't been soldered like for 60 years. So it must have been intermittent its whole life. Crazy. Right. So once that end is in, I like to straighten up the cap so then it's vertical, going in a straight line, just because I think it looks better than it on an angle. It just looks a bit odd. The end that we haven't soldered in, what we want to do is take one of our offcuts, or you could buy some wire, or you could use regular wire that you're going to use to wire up your pedal. I just like to use the legs, the offcuts, and slide it through, and I'm going to join the 4th tag along on the bottom with the 4th tag along on the top. And then we can solder both of them in. being very careful not to burn the body of our capacitor. So easy to do, especially if you're using a soldering iron that's hot enough. Perfect. I actually finished my soldering iron quest, and I finished it with just keeping a hack out after all of that. I don't know. I had lots of people messaging and telling me which irons they're using. I also had a lot of beginners messaging and say that they've started building pedals because of watching my videos. That is absolutely insane to me. It's such an amazing compliment that someone listened to me ramble making these things and decide to go and build their own pedal. It's mad. Right, now that that's in, our next capacitor is going to be our output cap, which is this. It's our Sprague 22 microfarad cap. Now there's an option here. To get Tony Iommi's tone, we could bump this cap up. That might stop us from having to increase our input cap too much and get away from the Rangemaster. Because let's not forget that Tony Iommi was using a Laney amp with a normal Rangemaster in the front. He didn't mod it as far as I know, or at least I can't find any information on it being modified. So we will have had the full-on treble tone going into the amp. So maybe we could swap that out for something like, I don't know, a 47 NF. I'd like to know in the comments what you think about that. But right now I'm just going to put the 22 NF in, and if we're not getting like the deep tone I'm after, then I'll swap it out and we'll add in the 47. The input cap makes way more difference to the tone, by the way. And another thing to watch for is if you increase the value of your input cap, you allow more bass through to the transistor, which means that there's more energy needed to amplify it, to amplify the circuit, and you kind of get like a more fuzzier tone with more bass. It's just the way that it works, which is why you find on a lot of pedals that the input cap isn't quite as aggressive on the size wise, because they want bass to get in there. And well, look at something like the fuzz face. You're talking like 2.2 microfarad input cap, and that's get all the bass in there, and it makes it really fuzzy and fluffy. Fuzzy and fluffy, are they even tone words? I don't know. Now this cap fits in exactly the same way as our other cap, where I've had to bend the legs over. Another thing to note is if you're constricted for size, as in your enclosure is so small that you can't fit this in, you could completely skip this tag altogether and run this cap straight from your pot to your output on your switch, because it's not actually connected to anything else in the circuit apart from the pot and the output, the 3-pole double throw output. Oh no, I've just ruined that. Look at that. And that is why, oh no I haven't. So really I should have some of them little arms that hold the cap in place while you solder. I haven't, and it just dropped down and touched my iron. But these caps are that beastly that it hasn't even melted or marked it or anything. So there you go. Tell you one thing though, it is annoying me falling over all the time. We can solder both halves of this cap because there's nothing else going into it. That's our tagboard wired up fully. That's all the components we need in the center, but now it's time to move to the components on the outside edge. There's going to be a little bit of a squeeze because we've got to get this cap to sit out here like this. It's real tight squeeze because there's not many tags and these caps are massive. And also we've got this 1 meg. If we take a look at our drawing, you'll see it. This 1 meg resistor, which is a anti-pop resistor. I have explained this before, but just as a quick refresh, we'll have 9V DC inside our pedal, but our caps do not allow DC to pass through them. So the 9V DC stays on the inside of this cap here. However, not all caps are perfect, so the DC sometimes leaks across the capacitor and sits here on the input in between this cap and our switch. And when we press our switch, the DC that's leaked through the cap discharges, and it gives you like a little pop. Hence why we add in an anti-pop resistor. And all that does is it goes from this side of our input cap to ground, which is the next pin along on our circuit here. It goes to ground, and all that does is as the 9-volt DC leaches across this gap and builds up here, it just shorts it straight to ground. And because 1 meg is a massive value, it doesn't get in the way of the circuit tonally, so it doesn't make no sound difference to it. All it does is bleed off that DC. Of course, capacitors allow AC to pass through them, and they block DC. That's the function of a capacitor. Well, one of the functions of a capacitor. So AC in our situation is our signal coming from our guitar. That's an AC sine wave, music, that's allowed to go through the cap and what have you, whereas the DC is blocked. I don't know, do people find that stuff interesting? I always think it's dead geeky, but then when I'm listening to something like the Truth About Vintage Amps, and Skip Simmons says, oh, I'm going to get geeky, everyone's going to fall asleep. What I normally do is pause the episode and go and get my notepad and pen and get ready to take some information down. So I don't know, what do you guys think about me adding loads of extra, well, just explanations of stuff like that? I mean, I know it's simple stuff to you electronic whizzes, but for me, when I was first starting out, that would have been amazing information, because I had no clue what a cap did. I just knew that you increase it and you get more bass, decrease it, you get more treble, sort of. But I didn't know that it blocked DC. Right, so our 1 meg resistor, if we look at our drawing, that is between the earth connection here, third pin along on the bottom, and the second pin along on the bottom, which is our input. That's the easy bit now. Now the hard bit is this cap. If you're sensible, unlike myself, you'll get a smaller cap. You could even, you know, get a different orientation or non-polar or something like that, and that would make it really, really easy. However, I don't believe in easy, so I'm not going to. The way I lay it out is, if we look at our drawing, you can see that the positive side of our cap goes into the first tag on the bottom row, and the negative side of our cap goes to ground. Now I could just solder this in here and then run it to ground somewhere in the pedal once it's in. That would completely work, and this pedal isn't too congested, so I could probably get away with that. However, if I'm building something like a Freerange, which has this circuit and a Kossoff drive in, I mean, I love my Freerange pedal. It's like my tone. So I built it for me, not for anyone else. Anyway, I had this circuit into a Kossoff drive. There's not that much space, especially if you're building in a regular enclosure. There just isn't enough. So I'm going to add it onto the tagboard, and it's going to go between our ground connection, which is this side of our 1 meg resistor, and here the bottom left tag on the left hand side, and the live side, listen to me as if it's live and dead. The positive side of our cap is going to go to the bottom left tag, and the negative side of our cap, surprisingly enough, is going to go to the ground. Now to fit this in, I'm going to have to do that same method where I bend the legs over. However, if we look at this, if I was to bend the legs over and situate the cap over this way, it's going to foul on this cap. So this leg here is just going to go straight down, because that way, yes, the cap will overhang this side, but it won't hit this cap. I did think about using just like a, I don't know, like something a bit more sensible, a bit smaller, and then I realised that it's me and I don't do that, so. Right, let's see. I'm just going to solder that first leg in there, and then we can manipulate it round and get the earth one in, because it's going to take a bit more gymnastics to get that side in. And as I say, on a regular Rangemaster, so if you're building a regular Rangemaster, you probably want 47 microfarads for this cap, same as this one. But for the Tony Iommi one, we're going to drop the value down and see if we can loosen the low end up a little bit. Right, there we are. Our last and final component that is going to go on the board is going to be this. It's a 20k trim pot. This one is from Spectral. It is really old, it's quite old, and every time I use them I always get about 5 comments of people saying, where do I get them from, blah blah blah. You just can't get these anymore, or I can't get them, and if you can, please let me know so I can go and buy them all. But I basically found a guy selling these and I bought every single one that he had because they're amazing, and the golden rule is when you find something good, you buy it all. Ask questions later, buy it all now. I mean, I fell foul of this in the past where I haven't bought everything that was in stock when I should have. Namely, some NKT275 They were great transistors. No one was using them. I had a line on them for like £10 each, I think they were, and I was still going through the stage of thinking £10 a lot for the transistor, and it is a lot for the transistor, but you know, when they're gone, and you wish that you bought them all. £10 seems like a, I don't know, like a really small figure that, you know, is trivial almost. So before I start doing this, these pots, normally you would have 3 legs on a pot, a center wiper, and then an input and an output, or 2 ends if you like. But this pot here doesn't. It has kind of like this weird situation where you've got 2 in the center, and then these are the outside wipers. So all I do is I use one of my legs offcuts to go between these 2 legs here, solder them together, and then I solder that to one of these legs, and it creates a variable resistor. If you're using a regular trim pot, what you want to do is solder the center pin, the wiper, to one of the other legs, and then use the 2 other legs as a simple as the simple connections. But I'm using this massive trim pot just because I think we're going to have space inside this pedal, and I like them. You could mount this off board. You could use a regular potentiometer if you really wanted to. You don't need a trim pot. There's no point in mounting it outside the enclosure or doing anything like you do for fuzz. For a Rangemaster, I wouldn't have thought. You know, the bias makes a difference, but it's very subtle. It's either sounds good or it sounds terrible in my book. But I'll show you how to bias it anyway when we get there. Okay, so if it wasn't weird enough that I'm sat out in my workshop talking to a camera, basically talking to myself, the camera's just died without me noticing, and I've literally just been talking to myself. Fantastic. So this is the situation we've got now. We have our little link across these 2, which creates our center wiper, and then we've got our 2 outside legs here that are going to go into our connections. As I say, if you're doing this yourself with a regular trim pot, you just join the center wiper to one of the other 2 legs and use the other 2 legs as your connections. So where's it going? You're going in the 3rd pin along, so 1, 2, 3, 3rd pin along, and 4th pin along. And you'll see on our drawing that the 3rd pin along is our emitter on our transistor, and the 4th pin along goes basically to that to the leg, to the offcut that we put in before. Now I'm just going to solder one side of this in, which will be the side with the leg, not the extension, just because the extension's a bit more malleable, so when I'm trying to straighten it up I'll be able to bend it round. There we go. There, and that's our circuit ready to go. Now comes the exciting part. It is of course the switch to go between Germanium, which is vintage, and we all know vintage is better, and Silicon, which is a bit more modern and usually looked down on from us tone chasers. I mean, let's face it, I'm the biggest cork sniffer of us all. However, for this build, even though I know that Tony Iommi used the Germanium Rangemaster, I'll be willing to bet that the Silicon variant hits the mark much more than the Germanium. Let's find out. So I'm going to be adding these onto this switch. It's a 4-pole double throw, which means that we have basically 4 single pole double throw switches in one go. Each switch will be this center pin. We'll either connect to here or here, depending on which position the switch is in. And there's just 4 of them in a row. So 3 of them would be like your stomp switch. And this has just got an extra one in. Why the extra one? Well, that is because I'm going to be adding in a bicolor LED, so that then when we flick it to one transistor, it will be red. And then when we flick it to the other transistor, it will go green. So our on-off LED will change colour, depending on which transistor we've got active. You could just use a 3-pole double throw switch if you wanted, but I thought this would be quite fun. Now, because we're soldering our NKT275 in there, I'm going to solder it in outside of the enclosure, just so that I've got a bit more space. You know, the first couple of these that you solder in, you do get a bit nervous about them. I mean, they're like, what, £700 for a pair at the minute on eBay if you want them to test good, which is ridiculous. However, you know, if you put too much heat in it, you are going to destroy something that is actually quite valuable, really. And then we've also got our silicon Texas Instruments. It's an old one. Let me see, what is it? It's a 2M4062, if anyone's interested. I used this in a fuzz for a guy who I know called Nick over in the States, and he really liked that fuzz, and it made me buy quite a few more of this type of transistor. I went back and bought the lot, in fact. So if we connect it up and have a look, our Atlas is telling us that it's a PNP Silicon transistor. That's important. We want PNP for this circuit, which is normally positive ground, but the way that we're going to do it, it's negative ground. And it's telling us our pin out, and it's telling us our current gain is 448. That is ridiculous amounts of gain for the Rangemaster. It's way too much, but I'm adding that in there to contrast the really low gain NKT275 that I've got. And because it's silicon, there'll be no leakage whatsoever. Great. Then our pin out. So our red is the base. This is where it starts getting awkward. So the red is the base, but we want the red to be in the center. So we're going to have to cross over some legs. Our green is the collector. So the green and the red need to cross over, and the blue is the emitter. So green and red cross over. Blue is the emitter. Great. So as we look at it now, I want to put in some sort of heat shrink or what have you, just to cover off this center leg so it doesn't short out. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take my wire and just slide a bit off the end, and then that can go on our transistor leg as a sheathing to stop it from rubbing on the other leg. I mean, you could manipulate them round so they're not touching each other, but as I always say, you might as well at least put one of them in, one of them covered up while you're in here. So now we have our collector, base, emitter. This is our switch. When it goes into the pedal, I like to put that little notch pointing upwards on the pedal. So if we get our enclosure here, I like to put the notch pointing that way. So that means that it's going to sit in the pedal that way round, and I want this to go up against the back wall, the back bulkhead, whatever you want to call it, the back edge. Mainly 2 reasons really. One, this is smaller than the NKT275, so our jacks come in over the top of this, which means that this could potentially not hit them, you know, because it's smaller. And 2, I really want that to be on show at the front here, so when someone opens the pedal, the NKT275 is sticking out the bottom and looking prominent. What we are going to do is we're going to put it in the first 3 tags from the left. So our emitter goes in the third one along, our base goes in the second one along, and our collector goes on this left hand side. And as I always show, I like to solder in the base or the center pin of any transistor. Really, it just happens to be the base in this one. And once that's in place, touched that a bit too early, didn't I? Once that's in place, we can straighten up the transistor and then solder the other 2 legs in. As it happens, I'm probably going to bend this down and out the way, so you probably won't see it, but I think you might as well have it straight, just because you never know who's going to be pulling your pedal apart one day. I see a lot of YouTube channels where they pull builds apart and analyze them and basically mark them points out of 10 or whatever it is. And I wouldn't want someone to start pulling one of my pedals apart and say it's rubbish. Now that's in there. We know we've got our collector, base, emitter. We want to do the same for our NKT275. And look, I'm doing that thing that everyone does. I'm trying not to touch the body of the transistor, because I know that they're affected by heat, as if the tiny body heat in my fingers are going to affect it like immediately that much that's going to void the test. I don't know. It's ridiculous, but we all do it. So there we have it. Let's see what we get. So it's a PNP Germanium, which we know and we want, gives us our pinout, and this current gain is 57. Would you believe my bloody batteries just run out again? Anyone got any better solutions that don't induce noise into your camera for a battery? I've tried buying one of them universal plug-in battery things, and it just made it really noisy, so it was unusable really. Anyway, so 57 is the current gain on this, so the strength of it, whereas this one was 400, so that's quite a mismatch. It's going to be interesting to see how they behave up against each other. And our leakage is 0.125, so that's right in there for use with a Rangemaster. I probably wouldn't use it in Q1 of a fuzz face, but definitely for the Rangemaster. And if we look at our pinout, or our legs, are saying the red is the emitter.
A few inches later.
Our blue is the collector, and the green is the base. Okay, so that way around. Blue is the collector, and really the blue, which it does, should have that red dot next to it. So when you see people say, oh, this is an NKT red dot, well, the red dot is just telling you which one's the collector. Some have white dots because probably the factory run out of paint. These are really cheap transistors back in the day, so they just probably dabbed it with anything. And what we're probably finding is Analog Man back in the day probably found a really definitive batch where like the red ones were higher gain, or the white, I forget which one, the white dot or red dot were higher gain, and he just probably bought a large batch of them, and that's what made it so. But anyway, the collector is our red dot, which is there, and the emitter is the other side. So we've got collector, base, emitter. Now I can see a problem here, because if I add this in on our switch like that, you're not going to see what it is. I might have to, I've got two choices really, the way that I see it, is fit it and bend it up and over so you can see what it is. I know it's fine, but it's a thing. Or I can cover all the legs and twist them round so then you can see. And I think that's the option I'm going to go with. So we know which way round we're going to go. And the legs are pretty clean. I know, because when I reclaimed it, I cleaned them. So they haven't been sat there for too long. In fact, I reclaimed this on the last video. I think it was the percolator video. I actually reclaimed this on the video. Let's see. So I am going to do all three legs. Regular viewers will know that I never cover all three legs, but I really do want to show the NKT275 on this. Only because they're so rare. And I mean, I think in the last year I've only had 3 of them. I know some people have built up like a big stash of them or whatever, but I really haven't. This is the last one I've got. So it's rather a special pedal. So all 3 legs are covered. And that means that when I fit it in here, I can manipulate them round without worrying about them fouling each other and shorting out. We'll be able to tell anyway, because we can put our tester on and test it afterwards, which I will do. So again, solder that center leg. And then normally we would just straighten up the transistor and then we're good to go. But because this is what it is, I want to spin it round and make it so then both the NKT and 275 are visible. I know it's vain. I'm going to get hate, but I don't care. It's an interesting thought that if you're paying extra to have a Rangemaster with one of these rather expensive and rather rare transistors in it, would you care if it was orientated round so that you couldn't read the writing on it? Or would you want it so then you could see the writing? To me, it's a no-brainer. I want to see the writing, but be interested to know if anyone else has any other thoughts on it. Now, when this goes in our pedal, we're going to use this switch here, our 4th pole, to switch the earth on our LED. So we'll either connect one half of the LED to this earth, or I'll show you that when we get inside the pedal. Next up, I'm going to make a 9-volt filter that will quieten this pedal down, and it's basically what was used in an old Crybaby wah, funnily enough. And here's all the parts we need for our filter. I'm going to try and wire them all up onto a single tag. No other reason than I've got this loaf and round, and I don't fancy using Vero board for this build. We need a 100 microfarad cap. I'm using this Sprague 100 UF 100 volt DC cap, meant for an amplifier really, this one, but I'm going to use it anyway. Then we've got this 100 NF box ceramic cap. I really like these. I know I shouldn't because they're ceramic or whatever, but I like them. And then here's the key. You've got a choice. You can either have one 1K resistor, or you can have 2 lower values that don't exceed 1K. So I've got 2 390 ohm resistors. And how this all works is, the premise behind it is we have a resistor. Our voltage will come in through this resistor, and that'll remove some of the raggedy edges, the noise on it. Then we have these 2 caps in parallel, which is our, well, yeah, it would be that way around, which is our 100 NF and our 100 UF, 100 microfarad caps. The way that I like to think about this is that noise is an AC sine wave. It just is, because all sound is an AC sine wave. And what we've got to do is we've got to try and capture that noise and shunt it to ground. So as the signal touches these caps, the noise, the larger big sweeps will get caught by the big cap, and the smaller sweeps, or the smaller sine wave, will get caught by the smaller cap. And it goes, because caps allow AC through but not DC, the AC noise signal will go through the cap and then to ground and get shorted out, whereas the DC power will sit at this side of the cap, unable to go through, because caps only allow AC. And then he said caps only allow DC through. Then don't listen to me. Caps only allow AC through, so the DC will sit this end. And then we have another resistor, another 390 ohm resistor, and that will allow the DC to flow through it, and it's like an extra stage of filtering before it goes into our circuit. And this is exactly how amplifiers filter too. Like I was saying before, Dumble and Ken Fisher from Trainwreck, both of them like really heavy filtering, so they would like jack up, like 80 microfarads would be the first filter cap on a Trainwreck amplifier, whereas 30 microfarads would be in something like a Fender, or 47 microfarads. So it's like almost double, or in some cases more than double the filtering stage. Well, that's what we're doing here anyway. We're making an amplifier filter. The aforementioned Crybaby wah just used one 1K resistor to allow signal in, and it didn't have a resistor on the output of the filter, but I like to add it in. And it also had a 9-volt Zener diode in here, so then if someone plugs in the pedal to the reverse polarity, it protects the pedal. I don't add that in either, don't ask. I just feel like it's extra components for the sake of it. Just don't plug it in wrong. Okay, so how are we going to attach this? Now clearly this is going to be a nightmare, and I've chose something that's making life awkward for myself yet again. As I always say, ideally you want to have the voltage and the capacitance pointing upwards, so then people can see it, and if anyone's doing maintenance on the pedal in the future, they can see what they're working with. But because it's me, I care more about the Sprague pointing upwards, so I'm going to add that at the top and then bend the legs over, and we can see that we might just be able to get it to foul the outside of them tags. So I'll fit that last. In the centre here, I'm going to use my flat nose pliers, my good old Nipex flat nose pliers, which I love, to bend the legs out, and that gives me a perfect spacing every time, so the cap is straight and on the same level, and that's just going to go through both sides. If I solder one leg in, I'll be able to... never soldered that very well, did I? Well done, Joe. Right, so there's the earth terminal, or the negative side, soldered in. I can straighten that cap up here. It would have probably been easier to use two of these tags and I would have had a bit more space, but there you go. So now for our resistors, the input and output, all I'm going to do is bend the top over in a loop, and that's going to allow me to attach the wire to it later on when it's inside the pedal. It just makes it a bit easier. And I'll do the same for this one. Now both of these go to the live side, or the 9-volt side of these caps, because our voltage goes in through one of these and then straight out through one of these. We only want it to touch one half of our capacitors, so I'm going to add these in, one through this side and one through the other side. So if I just solder that in quickly. Or not so quickly, as the case may be. And then I can solder the other one going through the other tag here on this side. And that is our input and output of our filter sorted. The only thing left to do is the huge cap. So there's our input and output. Good. Now this huge cap will go on here, and of course the other way around. This side here, I'm going to run a wire to earth once it's inside the enclosure. Let's see if I can bend them round so they're on the inside of it. There. There's one side in. Well, if nothing else, the big cap is at least making this single tag stable. I don't know why I always have to try and make things hard for myself. I mean, why don't I just choose a normal 100 microfarad cap? Like, I've got loads of them. Just, I don't know. It's almost like I want to make a challenge. So let's tidy that up a bit better. There we are. There's our 9-volt filter ready to go. So let's see what are we working with our space inside here. I'm not too sure whether we're going to have all the space in the world or not. Of course, we're going to have our CTS, our vintage CTS pot. Let's go on this side, and then we've got our transistor switch this side. So where's this going to go? Probably there with the with the trim pot pointing right the way down the back. And then where's this going to go? Not as much space as I thought there might be. Maybe this will just slot in right next to it there. Tell you what, it's going to be a pretty full enclosure considering I thought I had so much space. I'm going to go ahead and mount all the hardware onto the enclosure. That's all of our hardware in the enclosure. I did go for some brass appointments. So we've got our little switch covering, switch washer and stomp switch washer. Also, I've got my one-way ticket to hell badge on the front. Thought this might at least fit in with the Tony Iommi theme. And then inside, this is the bit that I love. Look at this. This is the internals, and here we have our NKT275 transistor, and tucked away at the back we've got our silicon, our main tag board, and then we've got our power filter, our CTS pot at the back there. It's looking rather good, and then also our LED with 3 legs on it, and that's because we've got 2 LEDs in one. It's a bicolor LED. I'll show you how that works as we wire it in. And of course all of this is subject to change and may have an issue with, say, the input cap. May not be dark enough for the tone that we're going for, but we'll check all of that. Right, let's get on to the wiring. The original Dallas Rangemaster was designed to push a dark amp right into that trebly upper mid focus territory that would cut through the mix. But that's not how Tony Iommi used it. He used it to pummel an already gained up amp to give it that extra push because he didn't have the end of his fingers. Mad. He adapted from having no fingers to create a whole new genre of music. So as people know, I usually like to start in the top left of the tag board and work my way along. However, today I'm going to start off with the signal path. So our input and output jacks are going to attach to the input and output of our 3-pole double throw switch. So this is the input jack, remembering that the pedal is upside down. So the left hand side is the input. So we're going to come from this tag down here on our input, and my wiring loom is going to come straight. Ooh, I'm knocking my LED there. I definitely don't want to do that. It's going to come straight down the center here, round the back, and I'm going to ponytail it up and go into my switch. So this input is going to go to the left hand side, and this output is going to go to the right hand side, and that's the first thing I'm going to wire up. There's our input and output now in place. Next up is going to be adding the input to the whole circuit. So that's going to go through our input cap, this black cap here for Black Sabbath, this black cap here for Black Sabbath, and that is the second pin along on the bottom row. If you have a look at our drawing, you see that it just goes straight from the second pin along in the bottom row. I'm going to run it round the front here and into this wiring loom right here, round the back of the ponytail and up and into this bit here. Also, I'm going to use the little thing that Marcus Reeve showed the other day, which is to run the wire or a connection from this input pin to this back center pin here. So then when the pedal is off, it earths out the circuit. I've started doing that now and it's just become a thing. That's the input of our circuit now wired in, and also the extra wire added in to go to this back tag here, which will earth out the circuit when the pedal's in the off position. Now we're going to wire up the output. So our output comes from the center wiper of our CTS pot, goes through this capacitor and then up to the output of our whole circuit. And that's why I was saying, if you wanted to cut this down by 1 tag and just do 4 tags, you could run this capacitor straight from this pot right the way over the top to this pin. But I just like to add it to the tag board just to keep it all neat. See, they look good all in a row. My plan is going to be to run the wire round the back of the LED. It's going to meet up with the wiring loom coming out the back of our jacks, round here, and then down and to the capacitor. And then from the capacitor, I'm just going to use one of my offcuts, one of my legs, to go straight from there up to the switch. There's our output wired up. We've got our center wiper coming right the way around, meeting up with our sprag cap, through the sprag cap and then through this leg up until our output, and then that'll attach to here and go to the output jack. Awesome. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and wire in all the earths, or the negative side of things. So I'm going to run one wire through our jacks. It's going to go through these earth pins on our jack, and I know they're already earthed to the enclosure. However, if they were to work loose during a gig, it would make the pedal intermittent, and we don't want that. So these 2 jacks, I'm going to wire them together with a piece of copper wire, and that's going to continue over and hit our 9-volt DC jack. This is the earth connection right here. I'm also going to run a wire from this one here down. It's going to come round and follow this wiring loom right the way round here. It's going to go to this earth connection here. Then it's going to split off. One side is going to go round and into the 3rd pin on our tag board, and that is going to be the earth connection on our tag board, and another wire is going to come round the back of the switch and to the centre pin of our 3-pole double throw switch, and that is our negative. That is going to be for A, grounding out the circuit when it's off, and B, to ground out our LED. I'll show you how we're going to wire that in a second, or once we've done this I'll show you how we're going to wire in the LED. Of course, I missed out one of our connections. I missed out pin 1 of our pot. That has to go to earth as well, so I had to run another wire from our circuit right the way down our wiring loom and to pin 1. Now, before we move on any further, the next step is going to be to add in the earth for our LED. Now, how our LED works: our LED is 2 LEDs in one, so it's 3 legs. The centre leg is our live, and all I'm going to do is run a current limiting resistor straight from our 9-volt DC jack to the centre pin. Now, I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to do that very last because I don't want it hanging in the way while I'm trying to work. What I will do is our earth connection from this pin here. So here's our earth for our LED. When it connects to this pin here, when the pedal is on, we want to send that earth to our LED to turn it on, obviously. Or maybe not obviously, but that's what we want to do. So I'm going to run a wire out the back of the switch from this pin, round, and it's going to come to this pin here, the centre pin of our switch here, our 4-pole double throw switch. And then where it's going to go is, if the switch is in this half, like connected this way to connect our silicon transistor, we're going to have a wire coming round and going to one half of the LED, say for example to turn it on green, and all that does is allow the green half of our LED to go to earth, to go to ground, which turns it on. Then if we switch it the other way, it connects our earth from the centre pin here to this pin, which will run down to the other half of the LED, which then turns on, for example, the red half of the LED, and that will signify the other transistor, the NKT275. Now, I can't remember which leg is which, so I don't know which one's green, I don't know which one's red. I'm kind of hoping that I get the red dot on the red side, but I'm certainly not going to mess about trying to unsolder things once I've soldered them in. Anyway, I'm not going to run anything else other than the earth wire to the centre pin here, and then a wire from each of these round to our LED. There's our LED earths wired in on either side of our 4-pole double throw switch, and our earth or ground coming from our pin here going to the centre pin of our 4-pole double throw switch. Now we'll want to tackle the difficult bit. Difficult? It's not difficult, but now we want to tackle an awkward bit, which is going to be the 3 connections that go to our transistors, and they are here. So it's going to be our collector, base, and then emitter. Now normally the transistor would be sat in these 3 pins, but if we look at our drawing, we can see that I've just labelled them up C, B and E for collector, base and emitter. I'm going to run wires from, I'm going to start off with the emitter, which is this one here, and I'm going to run a wire round the edge of the tagboard to the wiring loom, up and then over the top, and it's going to connect in right here. And then I'll do the base the same way, and then the collector the same way. Now the only difference with the collector is the collector is going to have two connections on it. One's going to go to our collector of our transistors, of course, because we need that. But the other one, if we look at our drawing, we can see that there's another line coming out of that. That is our actual output to our volume pot, to our boost pot. I'm just going to run one of my component legs, or maybe I'll use a bit of this coated copper wire just to add that in there, for no other reason than it just adds a bit of rigidity to it between the pot and the PCB. The PCB? I always say that. It's not a PCB, it's a tagboard. Come on, Joe. Between the tagboard and the pot. That's our transistors wired in. We've got our collector going to this pin here, our base going to this pin here, and our emitter going to this pin here. And of course we've got our output from our circuit going to our 10k CTS pot, where it then comes from there to the wiper right the way around, and then if we turn the pot down, it just exposes the wiper more to earth, which is this pin here, that goes to ground, and that just bleeds the signal to ground. Perfect. Now, before I go any further, I am going to add in this little loop at the back here, because I should have really put that in when I was doing the signal path, and I completely forgot about it, and I always do forget about it. So while we're here, I'll put that in. Then after that, I think the only thing left to do, apart from adding 7 billion cable ties in there, which I'm not going to do yet because we're going to do some biasing, the only thing left to do after that would be the live connections, the 9 volt, and that is going to come from our 9 volt jack round to one of these resistors, and then one of these resistors round to the circuit. It doesn't matter which resistor is which, because they both connect to the same pin on our filter, if you remember. And then also we'll run from the other one round to our circuit. There is 2 points in our circuit that that need to have a 9 volt going to them. Let me just tidy this up first. What I don't want to do is snip one of these wires I've put in place. That would be disastrous. There we go. So now on 9 volt, and I think this is the last thing we've got to run. It's going to come from these 2 pins here. As we know, this pin here is for our battery, which we never use unless we're doing a fuzz face, and this pin here is our actual 9 volt. The reason why they're that way around is if I plug a jack in here, it disconnects this pin from the power supply, so then you don't have 2 power supplies in parallel. What I'm going to do is I'll run a wire from this resistor here round our wiring loom and up through this bottom pin on our 9 volt DC jack. I'll solder it in, but I'll leave the end of it quite long, and then I'll bend that over to touch this tab at the same time, and that means that both of these tabs will always be live. With keeping the hole exposed on this tab, I can run my current limiting resistor from here round. I'll probably have to heat shrink in it and do a bit of manoeuvring, but I'll run it down and round and to the center pin of our LED. It's a bicolor LED. The center pin is the live, so I'll run our current limiting resistor straight from here down to there. Normally I use a 10k resistor. I tested this out with a 4.7k, and the red LED was really bright but the green was really dull, so I'm probably going to run a 1.5k resistor. I've never gone that low on the current limiting resistor before, but that's what I'm going to do for this one. The output of our filter is going to come round, and on our drawing there is 2 9 volt ins. We could have wired these up on the tag board beforehand, but after that Timmy build, I've got PTSD of underboard wiring, so it's going to be a while before I do that again. Yeah, definitely not. So this wire is going to come round. It's going to go to the 4th pin along, which is the positive side of this cap here, and also it's going to go to the positive side of this cap here. Easy. That's our 9 volt now wired up completely. I'm just going to have a little test and see if the LED works. There we go. So our LED works. Now, does it change colour with the switch? Yes, it does. So in the down position, that's going to connect. In the down position, it connects the upper two pins, which means that it's going to be our silicon transistor. So green is silicon. And then in the up position, it's going to connect the bottom 2 pins together, which is red, and that is our NKT red dot 275. Get in. That's awesome. So that at least works. Now, the next stage is going to be to bias our transistor, but before we do that, we may need to add in some resistors and other stuff to bias it. So before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and add in all of the cable ties, so then that's out the way, and any resistors I put over the top aren't going to be in the way when I'm trying to add the cable ties. This is looking pretty brutal, if I do say so myself. I'm pretty sure Tony Iommi would be happy with this. I mean, it does have a one-way ticket to hell on the front. Now we're on to biasing the transistors. So we know we've got 2 transistors. For this sort of pedal, I like to bias it to 7 volts maybe just a bit under, but 7 volts usually sounds pretty good, and it's a good starting point. You can always do it by ear after that, or even better still with an audio probe, as I've shown in my Kossoff drive video. So I'm not going to go through the audio probe. I will go through how we bias to different transistors. I mean, we know that our silicon transistor's got a HFE of like 400 and something, a gain of 400. It's very gainy. And our NKT275 has got like 50 odd. It's a stark difference between the two. So they shouldn't really bias together off this bias pot. So first things first, let's get the pedal. What I like to do is plug it in, turn it on and turn it up to full. Right now we've got it's in an up position, red, which is our Germanium NKT275. You take our Fluke multimeter, and again, like I've said in the past, if you haven't got one of these Fluke 101s, you can get them through the affiliates link in my description. Please do use the affiliates link. It helps the show. I get a little kickback from Amazon, and with no extra charge to yourself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from ground. In fact, yeah, let's put this side so then you can see. I'm terrible at making sure that everything's in view for the film, aren't I? Right. So there's our ground reference. And now what we want to do is switch our Fluke to volts. And we want to test our collector voltage. And this first pin here, if we look at our drawing, we can see that the first pin on the top left is our collector. So I'm just going to connect this over here. And look at that. I promise you, I did not test this in any way. 0.666, the devil's work. Oh, it's just changed to 5. So now what we want to do is, we want to flip this switch and see which one's higher. So our silicon is reading at 0.3. Now what I like to do is I like to bias in the one that's the lowest. So we want to try and get that up to 7 volts if we can. No, it's 6.5 at the minute. Now if we flip back to our germanium, oh my god, that's at 6.4. That's unusual. Usually they're wildly different. That's 6.6. We might actually get away with this without doing anything else, without adding anything else in, which is unfortunate for the video, but pretty good for the pedal. Right, there's a little bit of nuance of getting this in now. So our silicon's now biased at 6.6 and our germanium is at 6.4. It's very, very close to being okay there. I would like to get them up to 7, but I bet you this pushes the silicon well over the edge. Oh, there you go. 7 on the silicon and 6.67 on the germanium. Right, that's unfortunate because usually, in fact, 666, number of the beast. There you go. Tony Iommi, I've got your pedal sorted. Usually what happens is that the germanium side will be biased well higher. So when the silicon's at like 7 volts, the germanium would be at 8.5 or 9 volts. And then what I do is I take a trim pot, something like this, a 100k trim pot. I'll clip off one of the outside legs and I'll connect the wiper to our germanium transistor collector. So specifically the collector of the germanium transistor, not over here, because that is the same for both transistors. So we just go to this pin here, and then I would attach the other leg to earth, and in that way we can bias our germanium transistor on its own. So we can set our silicon transistor, it will all be fine, and then when we flick to germanium the voltage will go up, but then we use this extra trim pot to dial it back. However, as I've just shown, this for some reason this one is biased like perfectly. I'm half expecting it not to work now. But there we go. I suppose now I'll get the knob on, build this pedal back up, and we'll get a sound sample. We've got our circuit plugged into the TC wire tap. Apologies, I haven't got my transformer in line today, so the germanium transistor will sound absolutely spiky and terrible. But all we're going to do before we do the sound sample is just test if we can add some different cap values in here and see what happens. So for the input, we're going to try adding a 10 nanofarad cap, a 47 nanofarad cap, and a 1 microfarad cap. And yes, I am flexing with all these ITT caps. I do like them, and this is just about every value that I've got left. Then we'll also try adding the 1 microfarad cap to the output and see if we can get any difference there by stacking up the output, because remember, we're going for Tony Iommi's tone, and that's known for being quite thick and full, and that's what I'm going for, like terrifyingly dark and brutal. So my prediction is that the silicon transistor is probably going to suit this tone more, in my opinion. From past experience, I think that will be correct. I think that the germanium will be much more blues boomery. It has like a certain type of squawk to it, almost like a vowel-y presence. When you're picking notes, they jump out with like a vowel shape. Terrible tone descriptions there from me. Anyway, I've got the volume all the way up full, so the pedal's turned up to its max. I'll press play, and we are on the germanium transistor first. I'll just try each of these caps. I'll parallel them across the input. So what we'll end up with, for the 10 NF cap, we're actually going to add 10 and 10 together. We'll have a 20 NF cap. And then for the 47 NF, it will be 10 and 47. That will give us 57. And then a 1 microfarad. It's basically going to be 1 microfarad. The 10 NF in place won't make any difference. And I'm sure I'll short it out at some point, but it doesn't matter. It'll just come back when I remove the cap. Then we'll flick it over to the silicon and see what that does. So let's have a go. So this is just a clean tone. Now germanium, and let's put in our 10 NF. There's a slight difference there, but not all that much. Now what about 47? Now that's adding quite a bit to it. You can hear the bass quite extended there, and now with our 1 microfarad, I'm expecting this to be terrible to be fair. Yeah, that doesn't sound good to me. Sounds much better without it. Now let's try our silicon. So there's silicon already. I can hear that that's fuller, it's more aggressive, it's got more low end. And again, it's that, I don't know, the 400 HFE hitting home there. Yeah, right there. Let me press start and stop again so we get back to the chords. Let's see what we can do. That's 10 NF. Now let's try 47. I mean, it makes it sound thicker, but really I still think that's much better. It's like cutting through and brutal, but also thick. And then just for giggles, we'll try the 1 microfarad. Now that sounds terrible. It's almost like a gated fuzz. Anyway, so not all that good to me. I would prefer it the way that it is, because then you can have the NKT275 for like blues boomery music, and then flick it down into the silicon mode for Tony Iommi brutal. Let's just quickly try the output. We'll try the 47 and the 1 microfarad. And this is germanium. I can barely hear that being a difference. So not all that much difference there on the output for that. Now let's try the 1 microfarad. I mean, to be fair, I'm not really hearing that. Not really. So now I'm going to flip over to the silicon and let's see what we can do with the 47 microfarad. Negative 47 NF cap, not microfarad. I can't even hear the difference there. Maybe my hearing's just bad. And with the 1 microfarad cap, it's almost like it takes a little bit of sizzle away from it. Like I'm not overly happy with any of them. I think I'm just going to stick with the 22NF that I put in the Sprague, and the 10NF on the input. And I think that the silicon mode is going to hit the Tony Iommi tone, whereas, not that I can play any Tony Iommi, by the way, so you're getting a couple of power chords and maybe my my same old ZZ Top riff. And I think that the Germanium will be good for like Blues Boomer, and then you've got the Tony Iommi setting too. So yeah, let's get this boxed up and do a proper sound sample. It is that time of the video again. It's time for the sound sample. Now, before we dig into it, please, if you could like and subscribe if you haven't already, it'll really help the show. Thank you to everyone who has already. And now we're going to go on to the sound sample. After the sound sample, I'll give you my thoughts on both the NKT275 and the Texas Instruments Silicon transistor. I'll let you know what I think about the Sabbath tone that I'm trying to recreate. Of course, my playing's going to be nothing like Sabbath because I can't play guitar. But I would like to know what you think of both of these transistors, whether you think that the Germanium variant suits Tony better, or whether the Silicon variant hits that dark Sabbath tone. Now, no one asked me for my opinion, but I'm going to give you it anyway. I think that the Silicon variant really had that punch and bite and that thunderous dark tone that Tony's known for. I think it was better. I know, in my head, I know that it's not what he used. So it makes me think psychosomatically that maybe the Germanium's better. And I prefer that tone for me. However, I don't think it suits Tony's tone better. What did you think of the two transistors? If you like this video and you got value from it, you're going to love this video where I show you how to build an Abbey Road fuzz.